I work for ABAG, MTC, BCDC, and the Air District, which has been an adventure. And I'm also working now for the Climate Readiness Institute, which we've launched or just are launching at UC Berkeley with Berkeley, Stanford, and Davis on the academic side, and practitioners that we're bringing in from government and nonprofits to deal with some of the biggest project-type issues with climate change focused on the Bay Area. So they asked me to do something around hope and inspiration here and to show you some projects. We won't kid around. This is a huge set of problems and very serious issues that we're dealing with, but we're making some progress. It's not what we need yet at scale or at the speed in the Bay Area on sea level rise and on other climate impacts, but we are moving forward. So I'm going to show some examples of things from the different counties that you could either get involved with or see where we have to go, not only locally but regionally. So this was the first, many of you probably saw these, the first BCDC sea level rise maps 6 or 7 years ago. The kind of a bathtub model, very simple, and they looked at 1 meter of sea level rise and tried to show people, and everybody inched up to the front of their chairs to see if their home or their business was. I did slideshows in those days, and you saw people moving up when they saw these slides. Where am I? The good news is, we've got a number of more sophisticated mapping and planning tools for sea level rise now than we had even 3 years ago. So here I've just showed you 4 of them. On the upper left, we've got the Our Coast, Our Future. You can Google any of these, and I'll put up our website at the end where you can find links to them. Our Coast, Our Future is a fabulous local project for the Bay Area with NOAA and Point Blue and others, and it's a terrific new and sophisticated look at sea level rise and storms and tides all together, and you can overlay all sorts of different issues with it. In the upper right, we've got Surging Seas, which is done nationally, and now they've brought a California version of it here. It's being done by Climate Central. Same kind of thing, a more sophisticated viewer that NOAA came up with, and now you can overlay, and you can do this, or planners can do this online. You can look at different assets in a community and which are going to get wet under which scenarios. And again, you can vary the scenarios now. What kind of sea level rise? How much? What kind of a storm? How much? Is it at a high tide or a king tide? A very sophisticated kind of work. The lower left is CalAdapt. It's a little less sophisticated, but it's a good centrally located statewide approach, and they have a sea level rise section using a couple of different scenarios. And the right one is a very interesting decision support tool that Silicon Valley 2.0 is developing now for a project in Santa Clara County. So those are some, and there are other viewers. There are probably 6 or 7 now that allow individuals or planners to go online and start working to see what kinds of assets are in trouble, what kinds of vulnerable communities are going to get hit the hardest, in this case by sea level rise. We've done a whole set of inventories of projects, and our report, which you can find online, has inventoried about 100 projects in the Bay Area on different climate impacts. And I was asked to focus on sea level rise today, so that's about 30 of those 100 projects are around sea level rise, and they're run by government agencies, by nonprofits, some including private sector. They're mostly planning projects, but some are on the ground actually working with wetlands restoration and various types of things. But you'll see in our report about 30 different projects. So I'm going to very quickly do 10 of them in lightning fashion, and again, you can Google these or find them. Most of them are in our report. Our report, by the way, that came out in November, the 100 projects, is already out of date. There are projects I'm going to show you that we have to add to that, so that's a good sign. We've got a lot of innovation. Benicia is doing a fabulous vulnerability and risk report, looking again with a NOAA viewer and what gets wet in terms of key assets in Benicia, both public and private, under different sea level rise scenarios. And they just have the draft of the report out now. It's a great piece of work funded by the Coastal Conservancy, and a great example of what a city without a lot of resources can go find the resources to do this kind of initial planning. Sonoma is doing a wonderful, and they have a draft out now as part of their new climate action plan. They're combining GHG reduction and adaptation and resilience into one plan. They're doing a sea level rise viewer using the NOAA viewer on sea level rise along the coast and the bay. And they're doing a lot of work on atmospheric rivers, because this is not just about sea level rise. In the near term, this is much more about big storms that are going to hit and storm surge, and sea level rise over the decades will make that much worse. We hope it takes decades. It may be sooner. But the storms are a big deal now, and Sonoma County and the Water Agency are doing some fabulous work on these AR events, the big rainfall events that we're getting many more of here that are leading to flooding in Sonoma and other places. Marin just had $13.5 million damage from the December storms, which were a couple of AR events, these big rainfall dumps. Marin is doing a county-wide vulnerability assessment. The county just set aside $250,000, and they're trying to find some money to match that. This is not a picture of the vulnerability assessment. I thought it was a more interesting picture, but Marin is pulling 7 or 8 sea level rise projects together and going to create a more unified, coordinated approach, which is great. We need that kind of thing in every county. One of their projects in Marin is this Owlish project, which is going to allow you to look through a viewer like this and see in a certain area in Marin what sea level rise is going to look like in the future with different scenarios. It's a great way using technology to get people to understand better what's going to happen. City of Berkeley, this one's worth looking at because they've used their hazard mitigation plan, which is a planning process we already have to incorporate sea level rise and other climate impacts into it. This is something that's starting to look at, we're starting to look at it nationally. Can you combine hazard mitigation planning, which is already required by FEMA and the state, with climate planning and make the adaptation planning work into that framework? So Berkeley's taken an initial shot at that. BCDC has really done fabulous work on this, and this is really the mother of all sea level rise projects, the Adapting to Rising Tides project in a section of the coast or the bay in Alameda County. And they now have taken all of what they learned in 3 years of that project and put it together in something on their website called Finding Answers in Art. And so it's lessons learned and all for other communities to use to take the art project out. Jeremy Lowe has done there's some great private sector consultants, AECOM, ICF, ESA, Jeremy Lowe doing some fabulous work for Hayward and for Contra Costa County and others now to help them start to understand sea level rise issues in their areas, San Mateo County. Jeremy's got this great slide that I won't go into that basically is showing you in a complex way that the 50-year storm, so twice in a century, with a modest amount of sea level rise is going to become a 1 in 10-year storm by 2020, and by mid-century it's every year. So it's those high water marks. It's not mean sea level rise. It's those high water marks that you see here, and we can't go into this slide, but that's the takeaway. It's those storms and those highest tides of the year and sea level rise that together are going to get us very wet. San Francisco has done one of the greatest things yet in the country, which is to take all the science on sea level rise and translate it for their departments. And now each department in San Francisco that's doing for the city and county capital planning has to show how they're taking sea level rise into account in their capital improvement plan. And they did a great job of taking rather complex science and simplifying it so department heads will do this, and now they're required to do this with a checklist and all. And you can find this one on the web. It's incorporating some long title, Sea Level Rise Guidance for Capital Planning in San Francisco. Everyone should be doing this, and this is our first one in the Bay Area. Just a couple more. Silicon Valley 2.0 I mentioned. It's a decision support tool. AECOM has been the consultants on this for Santa Clara County. It is a fabulous look at a series of impacts, including sea level rise, and then giving planners in cities the ability to look at vulnerable populations, at key assets, at a whole set of things, and overlay different climate impacts and see what would the impacts be on their city. So this is going to become, this isn't out yet, but they've been working on it for, it seems like 10 years, but I think it's only been 2. But it's going to be a fabulous decision support tool for the county, and one we can use as a model. And finally, ABAG and BCDC have done a very interesting project now that you can find on the web, the Housing and Community Risk Project, where they first looked at housing in certain areas, starting with priority development areas, PDAs, that are at risk from both earthquakes and from sea level rise, the two together. And it's a lot of the same areas, liquefaction certainly occurring along the bayside, coastside. So they took that first as an analysis, and then second, they did a vulnerability, it's hard to see these, they did a vulnerability index, a social vulnerability index, to see which were the most at-risk communities in terms of income and various other indicators in the region. And then they mapped them, they mapped them together. So no, this isn't together. Here. So then they overlaid them, and you can see which of the communities that have the most to do with earthquakes and the most to do with sea level rise and are the most socially vulnerable, and start to work those together. Thank you. There's my email. I encourage any of you that want information on these projects to email me. I'm available for that. My job is to know a little bit about a whole bunch of things, not much depth. But I can point you in the right direction to the people that are doing this wonderful work. And there's our JPC website, which has all of the information that I just talked about. And if you ever haven't seen this one before, this is an old artist rendition of what Treasure Island was going to look like after the fair, when we were going to put the new airport for San Francisco, for the region, in the middle of the bay. So it's a good example of we don't have to go with what the planners say, okay? Thank you.